This week's blog post is the second in my series on the history of outdoor sculpture in New York City. This occasional series of blog posts will highlight the most important of the outdoor sculptures in New York City and provide some historical and art historical context for them. To read other blog posts in this series and on outdoor sculpture in New York City, click the New York City Sculpture tag, which is at the bottom of this screen. I have also been doing photos of all outdoor sculptures in New York City in chronological order on my Instagram page, which you have the link to at the bottom of this image as well. Okay. By the 1850s, New York City was a transportation hub due to the Erie Canal, steamships, and the burgeoning railroad system. It was also a manufacturing center, a financial center, and a transfer point for thousands, and later millions, of immigrants. The city's 500,000 residents included a growing middle class and a small percentage of extremely wealthy people. By the mid-19th century, New Yorkers finally had money and leisure to think about art on a large scale. The first sign of that is this sculpture commemorating General George Washington's ride down Broadway to reclaim New York after the British evacuated the city in 1783 at the end of the Revolutionary War. Washington was the first large-scale sculpture to be erected in the city after the equestrian sculpture of King George III at Bowling Green was hauled down and melted into musket balls in 1776. The only equestrian sculpture to be erected earlier in the United States was one representing Andrew Jackson, which sits near the White House. Washington is the first large-scale sculpture in a long series of monuments to come that were erected to honor military heroes in New York City. Henry Kirk Brown, 1814 to 1886, spent the early 1840s studying sculpture in Italy. He was one of the earliest American sculptors to do so. When he returned to the United States, he created the sculpture of DeWitt Clinton that we saw last week, and many others, of which Washington in Union Square is the most famous. I've discussed the style and subject of this particular work, the Washington, in detail in Getting More Enjoyment from Sculpture You Love, and I've discussed the historical context of the holiday known as Evacuation Day in Outdoor Monuments of Manhattan. Moving on, this is from 1857. Probably because American sculptors were still scarce, the monument at Madison Square that was raised to General William Jenkins Worth, a hero of the Mexican-American War, was mostly architectural. The 50-foot granite obelisk is credited to James Goodwin Batterson. Batterson was the owner of the New England Granite Works, which supplied, among many other projects, the granite for the fountain basin at Central Park's Bethesda Terrace. 4 millennia ago in ancient Egypt, the obelisk was used to honor the gods. Later it became a common memorial form, as in the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., and Alexander Hamilton's grave at Trinity Church in Manhattan. This obelisk includes a small relief of General Worth on a rearing horse, a relief of a collection of military implements that's known as a trophy, and the names of places where General Worth made significant contributions, which include Mexico and West Point. For more on Worth and this monument, I've given you a link to one of my blog posts. And now we're coming to 1859. Another indication of New York's increasing wealth was Central Park, a massively expensive project. Construction began in 1858 to a design by Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux. In a city that was already densely populated below 42nd Street, the park was intended to provide a space for fresh air and exercise, as well as pastoral views unobstructed by block upon block of row houses and mansions. Almost as soon as the construction of the park began, people began making donations to it: live, stuffed, and fossilized animals, and sculpture. Although Olmsted and Vaux had designed the park as a pastoral retreat, they did not have the final say in what happened to such donations. That was the job of the commissioners of the Central Park. One of the earliest donations the commissioners accepted was this bust of Germany's greatest playwright, Johann Christoph Friedrich von Schiller, given in 1859. The bust was sculpted by C.L. Richter, who doesn't appear to have created any other works in the U.S. Given the subject, he was probably a German sculptor, trained and working in Germany. Olmsted, who was supervising the park's construction, relegated Schiller to an out-of-the-way nook in the Ramble. But in 1863, the next donation of sculpture, Eagles and Prey, was placed along one of the main carriage roads in the park. Discussed that in last week's post. Within the next 20 years, a dozen monumental sculptures were scattered through the park. Today there are about 60. Schiller began a new trend in subjects of outdoor sculpture in New York City. Works donated by immigrants to honor the heroes of their home countries. In the 19th century, when America's doors were wide open to immigrants, many such sculptures were erected in the park. Those included Alexander von Humboldt, Sir Walter Scott, William Shakespeare, Giuseppe Mazzini, Thomas More, Robert Burns, Ludwig van Beethoven, the Pilgrim, 2 sculptures of Christopher Columbus, and Bertel Thorvaldsen. Sculptures outside Central Park honoring heroes of immigrants include Goethe, Thomas More, Garibaldi, Heinrich Heine, Beethoven, Mozart, the Verdi Monument, Verrazzano, von Weber, and Grieg. In case you're wondering, lists like this is how I'm going to keep the history of outdoor sculpture in New York City series of blog posts from going on forever. Most of those sculptures I won't be mentioning again. They're just not remarkable enough. Next week we move on to Civil War memorials. Diane Durante-Ryder has hundreds of posts on sculpture, painting, architecture, and my many other obsessions. To join the free Sunday Recommendations email list, visit the URL that's on the screen or email me. And you can say, "Well done, Diane," or support my work and receive rewards by means of the tip jar on DianeDuranteWriter.com. As always, thank you for listening.